1832, USA, the farmhouse that grew teeth and cried at dusk, the Olean Township folklore. The year was 1832. Olean Township, tucked deep in the folds of rural New York, was no stranger to silence. But silence has many shapes. In Olean, it carried the weight of unspoken things. The pines bent under winter winds, creaking like broken bones. Locals swore the trees whispered at night, words too faint to catch, but heavy enough to chill the marrow. Travelers passing through often spoke of the strange hush that descended the moment they entered the township. No birkal, no insects, just wind sweeping low across the fields and that constant rustle, like voices trapped between bark and needle. Few lingered long. Those who did left behind words that still hang in the county's archives, scribbled notes about the unease of the air, dreams full of shadowed porches, and a farmhouse that seemed alive. The farmhouse. Always the farmhouse. It stood at the edge of the pines, weather-beaten even when first raised. White paint peeled before its time. Windows clouded. The door seemed to sag like a tired mouth. Children dared each other to run up its steps, touch the knob, and sprint away before dark. They whispered that the house had teeth, though no one ever said what that meant. Some believed the whispers of the pines were tied to the house itself, that it pulled in voices, memories, and even prayers, swallowing them whole until they became part of the wind. Old farmers muttered about nights when their cattle lowed in fear, eyes wide at shadows that should not have moved. Dogs refused to cross the road near the house, barking until their throats gave out. And then there was the dusk. Every evening, as the sun bled into the hills, the house seemed to shift. Boards groaned, shutters clattered though no wind blew, and from the porch came a sound too soft to be thunder and too deep to be the settling of wood. Some called it weeping. Others swore it was laughter. But everyone agreed it was the sound of something alive. In 1832, Olean was a farming community, bound by church bells and the steady rhythm of plows. People did not speak of curses or living houses. Yet in hushed kitchens by the glow of oil lamps, the farmhouse was all they spoke of. A family had once lived there, a family that no one dared to name, a family that had vanished as if swallowed by the soil itself. The whispers in the pines grew louder after they were gone. Travelers recorded sleepless nights in the township. They spoke of footsteps on stairs and empty inns, of voices murmuring their names in dreams. A schoolteacher passing through wrote in her journal of seeing children standing by the farmhouse porch, children who vanished when she called out to them. She burned her journal before leaving, but fragments remain. "They wanted me inside," she wrote. "The house, it breathes." What frightened Olean most was not what people saw, but what they felt. A heaviness in the chest, a sense of being watched, the prickling on the neck when dusk arrived, as though the entire town held its breath in unison with the farmhouse. And so the people stayed silent. They tilled their fields. They prayed on Sundays. But when the wind pressed through the pines at night, carrying whispers like dying sighs, they turned their faces away. The township had learned one truth, carved deep into its soul. Some houses are built of timber and stone. Others are built of sorrow. It was no ordinary house. That was the phrase whispered by those who lived longest in Olean. A farmhouse should be shelter, a place where life is grown, where bread rises in the oven and families gather by lamplight. But this one was something else entirely. From the moment it was built, neighbors said the walls seemed too thick, the ceilings too low, the angles too sharp, as if the house had been forced together, unwilling to take shape. Nails bent, beams split, tools broke in the builder's hands. One carpenter even left the job unfinished after 3 fingers were crushed by a falling beam, claiming the house had no want for him. The remark was laughed off at first, but no one truly forgot it. What came after was harder to ignore. By the second winter, strange marks appeared on the floors inside. Long scratches, as though clawed from within the planks. The family who lived there blamed rats, though no trap ever caught one. The barn cats refused to enter, their backs arched, tails puffed. At night, faint gnawing sounds carried from the walls. not for mice or beetles, but something heavier. Vet, patient, chewing as though the house itself was trying to swallow its own bones. Soon, the stories grew darker. Children spoke of teeth. They said the farmhouse grew them. White shapes behind the cracks in the walls, jagged shadows beneath the stairs. When the lanterns dimmed, it was said you could see a glimmer of enamel deep in the wood, as if the house had hidden a mouth. Parents scolded such talk, but even they admitted to biting their tongues when the boards gave off groans too much like hunger. A woman who came to help with laundry claimed her sleeve had been tugged by something unseen. A farmer swore that when he leaned against the porch rail, the wood pulsed like flesh beneath his palm. Another time, a traveling doctor stayed the night. In the morning, he left before dawn, pale and shaking, muttering only one line, "That house wants." He never returned to Olean. And then came the sounds at dusk. Neighbors described it as a low moan, deep and guttural, spreading through the rafters as if the house were exhaling. But others said it wasn't breath, it was weeping. Sobs that rose from the boards themselves, echoing through the empty fields until even the owls fell silent. Once, a young boy swore he heard words in the sound. Please, begging, crying for release. The people of Olean began to avoid the road past the farmhouse. They cut paths through the woods, even though it added miles to their walk. Wagons quickened their pace, wheels clattering, horses foaming with sweat as they passed by. And yet, no matter how far they went, they claimed the sound followed them, the crying drifting on the wind, soft but inescapable. Inside the township, fear grew roots. People whispered that the house was feeding, not on animals, not on wood or soil, but on grief, on breath, on souls. Each moan at dusk was not just sound, it was a reminder that something within those walls was not finished, something still hungry. The farmhouse became more than a building. It was a wound in the land itself, a place where sorrow festered and spread, pulling the town into its hunger one sigh at a time. And as the years passed, the people realized the worst part. Hunger never ends. It was the children who first spoke of the breathing. They were the only ones small enough, bold enough, or foolish enough to press their ears to the walls of the farmhouse, to crouch in the grass near its rotting steps and wait in the twilight. While adults hurried past with eyes fixed on the ground, children lingered, and they swore they heard it. Breath, not wind, not with settling. A steady rhythm. Inhale, exhale, a house drawing air into itself. The sound was faint during the day, but as dusk settled, the hour when the light bent crooked and the trees leaned like watchmen, it grew louder. The farmhouse seemed to sigh, as though something inside it had been waiting all day for night to fall. One child told of feeling the boards beneath her hand lift with each exhale like the rise of a chest. Another said he placed his ear to the back door and heard what could only be a heartbeat, slow and deep, pulsing through the frame. Adults laughed, but the children never joined in. Their faces stayed pale, eyes fixed on the road where the farmhouse crouched in silence. Parents scolded their children for such fancies, forbade them from wandering near the farmhouse. But children know what adults refuse to see. Their silence was not forgetfulness. It was fear. A schoolteacher once dared to question them directly. She gathered a group and asked, "What does the house say when it breathes?" The children fell quiet, looking anywhere but her eyes. At last, one girl whispered a single word, "Hungry." That word spread like smoke through the township. Hungry. The farmhouse was not just alive, it was starving. And if children could hear its breath, what else might they hear? What else might it take? Some nights, when dusk clung heavy over Olean, parents claimed their children wandered in their sleep. Tiny footsteps padding across creaking floors. Eyes open but unseeing. Always moving toward the road. Always toward the farmhouse. Mothers shook them awake, clutching them with trembling hands, while fathers locked doors and prayed under their breath. The dreams worsened. Children began to draw strange shapes in the dirt. Houses with gaping mouths, trees bending toward a single window, stick figures walking inside and never coming out. One autumn, 3 children vanished. They had been playing hide-and-seek near the edge of the woods. Their footprints led toward the farmhouse, but never returned. A search was mounted. Lanterns combed the fields. Hounds bayed in the darkness. Yet not a single trace was found. When dusk fell that night, the farmhouse moaned louder than ever before, and some swore it no longer sounded like weeping. It sounded like satisfaction. From that day on, Olean children were kept under strict watch. Yet even then, parents feared their little ones would be lured away, not by force, but by the slow, steady breath of the farmhouse, calling, beckoning, promising something it could never give back. In Olean Township, the children heard it first, and they understood what their parents could not say aloud. The house was alive, and it was waiting. The night was black as pitch when the search party went out. 3 children had vanished by the edge of the woods, their laughter swallowed by the evening wind. Fathers, neighbors, and farmhands carried lanterns, their flames trembling against the corn stalks. Every man swore he would not rest until the children were found. But by dawn, they would return with their faces pale, their lanterns dim, and their voices hushed. The fields around the farmhouse were thick with corn that autumn. The stalks stood tall, dry, and whispering in the breeze. As the men moved deeper into the rows, the sound of their boots crunching husks was drowned by the eerie rustle, like countless voices murmuring just out of reach. Lantern light cut narrow tunnels through the stalks, flickering with every step. But the further they walked, the more they felt the rows close in, bending as if to push them toward a single point. That point was always the farmhouse. One man swore he saw a light ahead, 3 small lanterns bobbing in the distance, weaving between the stalks. He shouted, thinking the children were alive, that they had wandered too far. He chased the glow, stumbling and gasping, until his knees hit soft earth. There was no lantern, only a single shoe, half buried in the soil. Others claimed the corn itself shifted. Rows that once opened toward the road seemed to bend back in on themselves, trapping the men in loops. The stalks brushed their arms, their necks, their faces, as though alive. More than once, a man screamed that something had tugged his coat from behind. Cold fingers, too small to be adult, too insistent to be wind. When the group turned their lanterns, there was nothing. And yet, one by one, lanterns began to go out. No wind, no stambid, just a sudden hiss, as though an unseen breath had blown across the flame. Darkness swallowed each man until only a handful of lights bobbed weakly in the endless rows. They huddled close, shoulders tight, whispering prayers. One swore he heard a child's laughter trailing between the stalks, soft as a lullaby. Another heard crying. They found nothing that night. Not the children, not even their clothes. Only the abandoned shoe and a ragged doll missing its head, lying face down in the dirt. But the township remembered something else, the sound that came from the farmhouse as the men returned home, exhausted and defeated. From its sagging porch rolled a low, hollow groan. Some swore it was a laugh. Others called it a sob. But all agreed it was the sound of something waiting, something full. In the weeks that followed, the corn around the farmhouse grew faster than anywhere else in the township. Taller, thicker, as if nourished by something more than rain and soil. The stalks bent unnaturally in the wind, always toward the house, as though bowing. Parents warned their children never to step foot near those fields. Yet even so, some swore they saw small shapes moving among the rows at dusk. Lantern-sized glows, shadows darting between stalks, too fast to follow, too real to ignore. The children of Olean were gone, and the cornfield had swallowed the only light that tried to find them. It began with the floors. The farmhouse had stood abandoned for months after the search for the missing children ended, but soon whispers spread that neighbors saw a lantern light flickering through its cracked windows. When a group of men dared to enter, what they found left even the bravest pale and wordless. Dark stains marred the wooden boards of the parlor floor. They spread in wide arcs, like something had been dragged, clawed, or fought across the room. The stains had the color of rust, the hue of old wounds. At first, the men claimed it was nothing more than spilled paint or the natural rot of the wood. But when they knelt closer, The truth became harder to deny. The smell lingered faint, metallic. The pattern pooled in places too heavy, too thick to be anything but blood. And no matter what they did, the stains remained. Buckets of water were hauled in. Soap scoured against the wood until bristles frayed and hands bled. Yet when the suds cleared, the stains only deepened, as though rising from beneath the boards themselves. Even when shavings of the floor were cut away with knives, the color returned by morning, always in the same shape, always spreading further. Word traveled quickly through Olean. People whispered of cursed wood, of the house feeding on what had been spilled there. Others said the blood was not merely a mark of death, but a signature, the farmhouse writing its hunger into its very bones. A traveling preacher, stern and skeptical, declared it the work of imagination. He entered the house one bright Sunday, carrying only a Bible and a bucket of holy water. His congregation stood outside in the fields, waiting, their eyes fixed on the warped door. Hours passed. When he emerged, his face was pale as candle wax. He spoke no sermon. He gave no blessing. He only shook his head, muttering, "The floor will not drink." And he left Olean that very night. Some townsfolk believed the stains were tied to the missing children, that their blood had seeped into the boards, binding them forever to the house. Others whispered of a family long before the disappearances, a family who once lived there and vanished without burial. Their cries, their wounds, etched forever in wood and nail. But perhaps the most chilling detail came from a farmer's wife, who swore she saw the stains move. One dusk, when the parlor window caught the red slant of the setting sun, she said the shapes quivered, stretching like fingers across the floorboards. She claimed they were reaching toward the door, as if trying to drag someone in. The farmhouse, it seemed, was not only hungry, it remembered. And memory, like hunger, does not fade. Neighbors avoided the house after that. They crossed themselves when walking past, keeping their eyes on the ground. Yet every now and then, a traveler would pass through, ignorant of Olean's whispers. Some claimed those travelers went missing. Others insisted the stains grew darker after such disappearances, as though the house itself was keeping count. In time, the people of Olean understood a truth too heavy to speak aloud. Blood may be spilled in any home, but in this house, blood stayed. Long before the children disappeared, before the blood that would not wash away, there was another story. Older, quieter, the kind that only surfaced in whispers when the lamps burned low. The farmhouse had not always stood empty. Once it held a family, and one night, without warning, that family was gone. No one knew the exact year. Some said 1829, others 1830. But everyone agreed it happened in winter. Snow lay heavy on the fields, muffling sound, bending roofs. The family had been seen that very morning, smoke curling from the chimney, the father walking toward the barn with his axe over his shoulder. By nightfall, every window of the house glowed with lamplight. And then silence. When a neighbor came by the next day, he found the farmhouse wide open. The front door sagged ajar, snow blowing across the threshold. Inside, the hearth still smoldered, food sat half-eaten on the table, and a cradle rocked faintly in the parlor though no one had touched it. Boots lined the entryway. Coats still hung on the pegs. The family, father, mother, 3 children, were simply gone. The sheriff organized a search. Tracks were found in the snow at first, bare feet, too small for the father, leading away from the house. But only a few yards into the field, they vanished, swallowed by drifts. No trail, no bodies, just emptiness. Some claimed the family had fled, perhaps escaping debt or scandal. But those who entered the farmhouse swore it told another story. Plates shattered in the kitchen, a chair overturned, and upstairs in the eldest child's room, the bedding was torn as if ripped by frantic hands. More than the scene itself, it was the sound that haunted the searchers. For as they stood in the parlor, snow thick against the windows, they swore they heard breathing in the walls. Slow, deep, too heavy to belong to wind or man. And then the cradle rocked again. The sheriff ordered the place sealed. No more talk, no more speculation. But silence could not erase what had been found. The townsfolk muttered that the house had claimed its first family, that it had tasted life and decided it would never be without it again. Years later, when the children of Olean vanished near that same road, the memory returned. Parents remembered the missing family, the half-eaten bread, the smoldering hearth. And they whispered, "The house keeps what it takes." Some even claimed the family was never truly gone. That at dusk, when the windows clouded over, you could see shapes moving inside. A man's shadow across the parlor. A woman standing at the window. A child darting up the stairs. Figures blurred, like memories replaying themselves over and over. But when anyone tried to step closer, the shapes would vanish, and the house would groan, as though displeased at being watched. It was this story, passed from lips to ears in hushed tones, that sealed the farmhouse's fate in Olean's lore. The house had not been built for living. It had been built for taking. And it had started with a family who vanished at midnight, leaving behind only silence, smoke, and a cradle that rocked itself. For years, the church in Olean avoided the farmhouse. The congregation whispered of it, but from the pulpit there was only silence. Faith, after all, thrived on certainty, and there was no certainty to be had in a house that breathed and wept. But in 1832, when the children vanished and the stains darkened, the people turned desperate. They begged their pastor for guidance, and at last he spoke. Pastor Elijah Rook was a stern man, known for sermons that cut sharper than the winter air. He rarely bent to fear. Yet even he had long avoided mentioning the farmhouse. When he finally stood before the congregation one frostbitten Sunday and whispered the word curse, the church shuddered into silence. He told them a night years earlier, a night when he had entered the farmhouse alone. He had never confessed it before, but he carried the memory like a splinter under skin. He had been called to bless the home, back when the vanished family still lived there. They had heard strange noises, felt shadows pass through their rooms, and sought the Lord's protection. Elijah had gone with his Bible and a small vial of oil. At first, he recited scripture, his voice steady as the fire crackled. But then the house groaned, a deep, hollow moan that made his prayers falter. He swore the words twisted on his tongue, as though dragged from his mouth. The air grew thick, heavy, until every breath burned. And from the corner of his eye, he saw something impossible, teeth, gleaming white, pressing through the cracks in the walls like seedlings breaking soil. He fled. He never returned. And the very next winter, that family was gone. The congregation gasped, but Elijah's story did not end there. He confessed that in the years since, he had tried to bury the memory beneath sermons and scripture. Yet every dusk, as the wind curled through the pines, he heard the farmhouse crying. He heard it even when he was miles away, cloistered in his study. Sometimes, he said, the sound even followed him into his dreams. Then Elijah spoke words that chilled the pews to their core. The house is not cursed by man. It is cursed by what it was built upon. He would not explain further. He only warned his flock to keep their children close, to steer their wagons wide of the house. His silence after that sermon was louder than his words. He spoke no more of it, neither in church nor in private. But the people remembered, and as the months passed, some claimed the pastor himself began to change. His hair whitened before its time. His sermons grew softer, broken by pauses, as if he were listening to something no one else could hear. He stopped walking past the pines altogether. Some nights, his neighbors swore they heard him praying long after midnight, his voice trembling with the same rhythm as the farmhouse's moan. A year later, Elijah was found dead in his bed, eyes wide, mouth open as though gasping for air. On his bedside table lay his Bible, pages torn to shreds, as if by frantic hands. The townsfolk said he had finally told too much, that the house had taken back what it was owed. From then on, no pastor in Olean spoke of the farmhouse again. The silence returned, heavy and unbroken, and the house continued to cry at dusk, as if mourning a truth buried deeper than anyone dared to say. By the mid-1830s, the farmhouse had become a wound Olean tried to ignore. Everyone knew its stories, the vanished family, the missing children, the stains that spread like veins. But knowing and admitting are not the same. Neighbors who once gathered to search, who once whispered prayers for the lost, began to look away. Fear had curdled into something colder, denial. It started with small acts. Wagons shifted their paths, steering wide of the pines. Farmers plowed in silence when dusk neared, heads down, refusing to glance toward the sagging roof. Mothers clutched their children tighter, but scolded them not to mention the house aloud. "Don't feed it," they said. "Don't give it your voice." Soon, even grief was swallowed. Families of the missing were met with uneasy silence. The town no longer brought food to their doors or gathered in prayer. Instead, neighbors averted their eyes, afraid that pity itself might draw the farmhouse closer. The afflicted became shadows among their own people, haunted not just by loss, but by the coldness of a community too afraid to remember. One widow, whose son had vanished in the cornfield, begged for help to move away. She went door to door, her shawl pulled tight, her eyes swollen from weeping. Yet door after door closed before she could finish her plea. "We have nothing to give," one man muttered, though his barn brimmed with grain. "The house takes what it wants," another said, shutting his latch before she could speak again. She left on foot days later, her figure small against the endless road. No one ever saw her again, and still the house stood, its windows sagging like tired eyes, watching. The more the town tried to turn away, the louder its presence seemed to grow. Dusk carried moans across the fields, seeping into the very soil. Children pressed their ears to the floorboards at night, swearing they could hear it breathing through the earth. But when they tried to tell their parents, they were shushed, their words strangled before they could take root. The silence in Olean became a second curse. Families learned not to trust one another, for fear of stirring the whispers. Doors that once opened freely to neighbors now stayed bolted. Community gave way to suspicion, and suspicion gave way to shame. But shame does not erase memory. It buries it, lets it rot, and festers until it seeps through cracks. At night, some swore they saw shadows moving between homes, carried not by lantern light, but by something darker. Others claimed to hear the farmhouse's moan echoed in their own walls, as if the house had followed them home. There was one chilling moment that Olean never spoke of, but never forgot. One winter dusk, a young girl stood in the churchyard, pointing at the farmhouse in the distance. "It's crying," she said. The congregation froze, their faces pale. The pastor began to hush her, but then every head turned. For across the field, faint but unmistakable, the sound rolled through the air. The house was weeping, and for a long moment, so did the people. But when morning came, the silence returned. Neighbors turned their backs once more, pretending not to hear, pretending not to see. Because to acknowledge the farmhouse was to risk being taken by it. And so Olean did what people often do when faced with horror too great to name. They chose to forget. The storm came without warning. It was late October when the skies over Olean blackened, the clouds boiling in from the west. By dusk, rain lashed the township in sheets, turning fields into rivers of mud. The wind screamed through the pines, bending them nearly to the ground, and lightning clawed across the heavens. The townsfolk huddled in their homes, shutters barred, candles flickering in their trembling hands. And yet, above the roar of the storm, another sound rose, a groan, deep and terrible, rolling out across the fields. It came from the farmhouse. Neighbors swore they saw the house convulse in the lightning flashes. Its frame shuddered, its roof buckled. With each crack of thunder, the moans grew louder, swelling into what some called a scream. Windows burst outward, shards glittering like teeth in the rain. The chimney collapsed, spilling brick and ash across the sodden earth. Then came the strike. A bolt of lightning tore from the sky and split the farmhouse clean through. The roof sagged, the beams splintered, and a fiery glow lit the storm-soaked night. For a moment, it seemed the house was aflame, but no fire spread. Instead, witnesses claimed they saw the split walls pulse, glowing red as though veins ran through the wood. Some even swore they saw shapes writhing within, pressed against the jagged gap like bodies straining to escape. The storm raged until midnight, and by dawn, the skies cleared. The farmhouse still stood, but barely. Its roof sagged, its walls leaned inward, the split running jagged through its frame like a scar. Rain pooled in its parlor. Sutta hung loose. The place looked more corpse than home. And yet it breathed. Farmers tending their flooded fields claimed they heard it louder than before. The groan of wet timber carried not despair but defiance, as though the storm had not broken the house but awakened it. At dusk, when the township prayed for calm skies, the farmhouse wailed, its cries so loud that dogs howled in their kennels and cattle tore at their ropes. Some believed the lightning had revealed the house's true nature, that the storm had not been chance, but judgment. Others whispered that the split was not destruction at all, but birth, that the house was not dying, it was becoming. Children dared each other to creep close and peer through the crack. What they described made even grown men shiver, a glow, faint and red, like embers in a dying fire. And sometimes, when the wind pressed through, the glow flickered, revealing shapes. Shadows curled on the floor, stretched along the walls, moving though no one walked inside. The township prayed harder after that storm, but prayers cannot erase what eyes have seen. The farmhouse was no longer just a haunted place. It was wounded, scarred, alive in a way no timber should be. And though the storm had split it open, revealing the rot within, Olean learned something more terrible than all the whispers before. A thing that can be split can also grow back. By the 1840s, Olean had changed. Families had moved. Fields lay fallow, and the once bustling township carried an emptiness it could not shake. Yet through every season, through every year, the farmhouse remained. Weather-beaten, split but unfallen, breathing still. But what unnerved the people most was not what stood above the ground. It was what seemed to stir beneath it. Farmers plowing their fields near the pines often struck patches where the soil turned dark, almost black, and wet even in drought. Their plows caught on things buried shallow, splintered wood, scraps of cloth, once even what looked like a child's shoe half rotted by the earth. Some claimed bones surfaced after heavy rains, thin and small, scattered like seeds. When pressed, the sheriff called them animal remains, but no one truly believed him. At night, the ground itself seemed restless. More than one farmer swore he heard muffled sounds rising from beneath the soil. Moans, whispers, sometimes even laughter. Dogs pawed at the dirt and then fled, howling into the night. Horses refused to plow certain fields, eyes rolling, hooves stamping as if the ground burned them. The strangest signs came in autumn, when fog rolled thick through the township. In the pale mist, people claimed to see shapes half sunken in the soil, figures reaching, faces pressed upward as if clawing to the surface. By dawn, nothing remained but disturbed earth and the sickly smell of iron. Some said the land itself was cursed, that the farmhouse had not poisoned Olean, but had grown from it, not built, but born like a tumor sprouting from the very soil. Its hunger seeped downward, spreading through roots and clay, pulling everything into its veins. The house did not stand on Olean's land. Olean stood on its. A gravedigger, drunk and trembling, once confessed he had dug near the farmhouse after a burial. His spade struck something solid. Wood, he thought, an old coffin. But when he pressed his lantern close, he saw rows of teeth embedded in the plank, glinting like ivory. He dropped his spade and never returned to the trade again. The township lived in silence after that. Fields nearest the house went untended, left to rot back into forest. Travelers were told to keep moving, not to linger, not to ask questions. Children were warned never to dig in the soil, never to play near the pines. And yet, no warning could stop what pulsed beneath their feet, because Olean understood what outsiders did not. The farmhouse was not simply haunted. It was rooted. Its sorrow ran deeper than timber or stone. Beneath the soil of Olean lay everything it had taken: families, children, prayers, and everything it still hungered for. And as dusk fell each evening, the ground quivered faintly, as though something beneath the earth were breathing in rhythm with the house. Inhale, exhale, always waiting, always hungry. The township never spoke of leaving, but many did. Wagons creaked out under moonlight, families vanishing without farewell. Those who stayed lived with the silence, lived with the moan that rose from the pines each evening, lived with the dread of stepping too close to the soil that shifted underfoot. Because in Olean, every plow, every shovel, every footprint carried the same risk, unearthing what was buried and reminding the farmhouse that it was not yet finished. What remains beneath the soil of Olean is not memory. It is not history. It is hunger, and hunger does not rest. What remains beneath the soil of Olean is not memory. It is not history. It is hunger, and hunger does not rest.